This is the moment everything changed. While Americans were distracted by holiday shopping and social media drama, Mexico just delivered the most devastating blow to American economic dominance in modern history. A $50 billion trade agreement with BRICS that could end 200 years of North American partnership forever. And Donald Trump's reaction? Pure, unfiltered rage that's about to reshape the entire Western Hemisphere. You didn't hear about this on CNN. You won't find it trending on Twitter. But last Tuesday, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum stood in front of cameras in Mexico City and announced 5 words that should terrify Washington. Mexico chooses its own future. What happened next will change everything you thought you knew about American influence, Mexican independence, and the price of taking your closest neighbors for granted. Here's what they don't want you to know. Mexico just signed the largest trade deal in Latin American history with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. We're talking about $50 billion in guaranteed investments, technology transfers, and infrastructure projects that completely bypass American approval. This isn't just about trade. This is about Mexico building an entirely new economic foundation that doesn't depend on American permission to succeed. Let me take you behind closed doors to the moment everything changed. Picture this. It's December 3rd, 2024. Mexican trade officials are sitting in São Paulo, Brazil, finalizing details on what they're calling the Southern Gateway Initiative. The numbers are staggering. $15 billion in Chinese manufacturing investments, $12 billion in Brazilian agricultural partnerships, $8 billion in Russian energy infrastructure, $10 billion in Indian technology transfers, and $5 billion in South African mineral processing facilities. But here's the kicker that should keep Pentagon strategists awake at night. None of these deals require dollar transactions. We're talking about trade settlements in yuan, rubles, rupees, and reais Mexico just announced to the world that the dollar is optional for their economic future. This is the beginning of the end of American financial dominance in our own backyard. I've been covering international economics for over a decade, and I've never seen anything like this. When your next-door neighbor, the country that shares a 2,000-mile border with you, publicly declares economic independence, that's not diplomacy. That's a declaration of war disguised as a trade agreement. But unlike traditional warfare, this battle is being fought with infrastructure investments, technology partnerships, and currency diversification. Think about this like a neighborhood relationship. Imagine you've been the dominant house on the block for decades, telling everyone what they can and can't do, who they can and can't trade with. Then one day, your next-door neighbor announces they're building their own power grid, their own water system, their own internet network, and they're doing it all with the neighbors you told them to avoid. That's exactly what just happened between America and Mexico. While Trump was tweeting about building walls, Mexico was quietly building bridges, economic bridges to the fastest-growing economies on Earth. President Sheinbaum didn't just sign a trade deal. She signed a declaration of independence from American economic control. And the timing couldn't be more calculated. Here's where this gets really dangerous for American interests. Mexico isn't just diversifying their trade partners. They're weaponizing their geographic advantages. Think about it. Mexico sits between the 2 largest economies in the world, America and China. For decades, that position made them dependent on American goodwill. Now it makes them the perfect middleman for a new global economy that doesn't revolve around Washington. The BRICS partnership gives Mexico something they've never had before: alternatives. Chinese factories instead of American ones. Brazilian soybeans instead of American corn. Russian energy instead of American natural gas. Indian software instead of American technology. South African minerals instead of American suppliers. For the first time in Mexico's modern history, they can tell America no and still prosper. But here's what makes this even more devastating. Mexico didn't just join BRICS as a junior partner. They negotiated from a position of strength that most countries can only dream of. Mexico brings 130 million consumers, massive manufacturing capacity, critical mineral reserves, and most importantly, direct access to the American market. BRICS needed Mexico more than Mexico needed BRICS, and Mexico used that leverage brilliantly. Let me break down what this $50 billion actually represents in real terms. We're talking about 500 new factories across Mexico, employing over 2 million people. High-speed rail connecting Mexico City to Guadalajara using Chinese technology. Solar farms spanning thousands of acres built with Indian expertise. Port expansions on both coasts designed to handle Brazilian cargo ships and Russian oil tankers. This isn't just trade. This is Mexico building the infrastructure of a post-American economy. The psychological impact is even more devastating than the economic numbers. For 200 years, Mexico has lived in America's shadow, dependent on American markets, American technology, American approval. That relationship just ended. Mexico is now building partnerships with countries that see them as equals, not subordinates. Countries that offer technology transfers instead of just demanding cheap labor. Countries that invest in Mexican development instead of just extracting Mexican resources. Here's what Trump's team completely miscalculated. They thought economic pressure would make Mexico more dependent on America. Instead, it drove Mexico to find alternatives that make them less dependent on America. Every tariff threat, every immigration crackdown, every diplomatic slight pushed Mexico closer to this moment. Trump's America First policies didn't put America first. They put America last in Mexico's list of reliable partners. The immediate market reaction tells the story. The peso strengthened against the dollar for the first time in months. Mexican stocks surged. Foreign investment inquiries flooded Mexico City. Meanwhile, American companies with Mexican operations watched their competitive advantages evaporate overnight. When your supplier can get better deals from China than from you, your business model becomes obsolete. But the most shocking part isn't what Mexico signed, it's what they didn't sign. Mexico rejected American pressure to exclude Chinese technology from their 5G networks. They refused to limit Russian energy partnerships. They declined to restrict Brazilian agricultural imports. Mexico just told America that their days of dictating Mexican economic policy are over. Think about the symbolism. Mexico's signing ceremony took place in Brazil, not America. The documents were signed in Portuguese, Mandarin, and Spanish, no English. The photo opportunities featured handshakes with Beijing and Moscow, not Washington. Every visual element of this deal was designed to send one message: Mexico has moved on. Here's where this gets personal. For every American watching this video, Mexico is America's largest trading partner. We're talking about $800 billion in annual trade that could be at risk. American farmers who export to Mexico, manufacturers who depend on Mexican supply chains, retailers who sell Mexican products. All of these relationships just became infinitely more complicated. The ripple effects are already starting. American companies are scrambling to understand how Chinese competitors with Mexican bases will affect their market positions. Logistics firms are rerouting supply chains that have worked for decades. Financial institutions are preparing for currency transactions that don't involve dollars. This isn't theoretical. This is happening right now, today, while you're watching this video. But here's what makes Trump's rage so dangerous. Instead of recognizing this as a strategic disaster that requires careful diplomatic response, he's treating it as a personal insult that requires immediate retaliation. Sources close to the White House report that Trump is considering everything from border closures to tariff wars to military pressure. The man who promised to make America great again is about to make America irrelevant in its own hemisphere. The irony is breathtaking. Trump spent years complaining about Mexico taking advantage of America. Now Mexico has found partners who actually want to invest in Mexican success rather than just exploit Mexican labor. Trump created the exact scenario he claimed to be fighting against. Except now America is the one being left behind. What happens next will determine whether America can adapt to a multipolar world where neighboring countries have choices, or whether American arrogance will drive away the last allies willing to give us the benefit of the doubt. This is what they don't want you to know about Mexico's endgame. While Trump rages about betrayal and threatens retaliation, Mexico is already 3 moves ahead, implementing what I call the Independence Protocol, a systematic dismantling of every economic lever America has used to control Mexican policy for generations. And the scariest part? Other Latin American countries are watching, taking notes, and preparing to follow Mexico's playbook. Let me show you exactly how this plays out. Within 72 hours of the BRICS announcement, Colombia's president quietly flew to Mexico City for what they called routine diplomatic consultations. Argentina's finance minister canceled a scheduled meeting with U.S. Treasury officials. Brazil's foreign minister announced expanded South American trade initiatives. Chile's mining consortium started exploring partnerships with Mexican BRICS connections. This isn't coincidence. This is coordination. Here's what's happening behind the scenes that should terrify Washington strategists. Mexico just proved that American economic dominance in Latin America is optional. For decades, countries in the region believed they had no choice but to accept American terms, American prices, American political interference. Mexico just shattered that illusion with $50 billion in proof that alternatives exist, that partnerships can be profitable, that independence is achievable. The numbers tell a story that mainstream media won't touch. Since the BRICS announcement, Mexican peso reserves have diversified away from dollars at the fastest rate in modern history. Chinese yuan holdings increased 400% in 2 weeks. Russian ruble transactions surged. Brazilian real partnerships expanded. Mexico isn't just trading with BRICS. They're building a financial infrastructure that functions independently of American monetary policy. But here's where Mexico's strategy gets truly brilliant. They're not cutting America off completely. They're making America optional. Mexican officials are still taking meetings with American trade representatives, still discussing border cooperation, still maintaining diplomatic relations. But now those conversations happen between equals, not between master and subordinate. America has to compete for Mexican attention instead of demanding it. The psychological warfare is devastating. Every time Trump threatens Mexico with economic punishment, Mexico can simply point to their BRICS alternatives and shrug. Tariffs? China will absorb the difference. Border restrictions? Brazil offers better agricultural markets. Technology sanctions? India provides cutting-edge software solutions. Mexico has systematically eliminated every pressure point America used to control their behavior. Here's what this means for American families right now, today. That avocado you're buying at the grocery store, it might soon cost 40% more because Mexico is prioritizing Asian markets that pay premium prices. The manufacturing job that moved to Mexico decades ago, it's about to move to China-backed Mexican facilities that don't need American component suppliers. The vacation resort in Cancun you've been planning? Mexican tourism is pivoting toward Chinese, Brazilian, and Indian visitors who spend more and complain less than Americans. The most brutal part of Mexico's strategy is how they're using America's own tactics against us. For years, America weaponized economic dependence to force political compliance. Now Mexico is creating dependencies that flow the other way. American companies that invested billions in Mexican operations suddenly find themselves hostage to Mexican policy decisions. American consumers who depend on Mexican products discover that Mexico has other customers willing to pay more. Think about the timing. Mexico waited until after American elections, after holiday shopping season, after maximum political distraction. They calculated that by the time Americans realized what happened, the infrastructure would already be built, the partnerships would already be operational, the alternatives would already be proven. This wasn't emotional reaction. This was strategic patience, executed with surgical precision. The domino effect is already accelerating beyond Mexico. Venezuela announced expanded BRICS cooperation. Ecuador signed preliminary infrastructure agreements. Peru opened dialogue with Chinese development banks. Even traditional American allies like Panama are quietly exploring alternatives to dollar-dominated trade. Mexico didn't just change their own trajectory, they changed the trajectory of an entire hemisphere. Here's what keeps American strategists awake at night. Once countries prove they can prosper without American approval, that knowledge spreads like wildfire. Mexico's success becomes a blueprint for economic independence that every developing nation will study, adapt, and implement. The American century didn't end with military defeat. It's ending with economic irrelevance. But the most dangerous part isn't what Mexico has done. It's what they're about to do next. Sources close to the Mexican government indicate plans for a Latin American BRICS expansion summit in Mexico City next spring. The agenda? Creating a regional trade bloc that completely bypasses North American economic integration. We're not just watching Mexico leave the American sphere of influence. We're watching them build a competing sphere that could absorb every country from Panama to Argentina. The choice facing America is stark and immediate. We can continue the path of economic bullying, diplomatic arrogance, and political interference that drove Mexico to seek alternatives. Or we can finally learn that in a multipolar world, partnership beats domination, cooperation beats coercion, and respect beats threats. But that choice requires admitting that America's approach has failed, that our neighbors have legitimate grievances, that our dominance was never guaranteed. Mexico just handed America the most expensive lesson in modern diplomatic history. Take your allies for granted, and they'll find better friends. The $50 billion BRICS deal isn't just about Mexican independence. It's about the price of American arrogance. And that bill is coming due faster than anyone in Washington wants to admit. The question isn't whether America can win Mexico back. The question is whether America can learn from this humiliation before every other ally follows Mexico's example and walks away. Because once the world realizes they don't need American permission to succeed, American power becomes nothing more than American noise. What happens next will determine whether the United States adapts to a world where it's no longer the only option, or doubles down on the isolation that Mexico just proved is America's greatest weakness. The choice is ours. But the window is closing fast. If this opened your eyes to what's really happening in our own backyard, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Next week, I'm revealing the classified documents that show exactly how China orchestrated this entire Mexican strategy from the shadows. Drop a comment right now. Do you think America can repair this relationship, or is Mexico's independence permanent? Your perspective helps shape where this story goes next.